Welcome.
Great to see you. Great to see everyone. Honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me. So Josh, I'll give a little background on myself and then we'll let you ask me some questions.
Absolutely.
So I'm a West Coast guy, went to college at Stanford and business school there as well. And in my mid-20s, started one of the world's first boutique hotel companies called Joie de Vivre, which I love the fact that the name of the company was speaking to the experience we wanted to offer our employees and our customers. And Joie de Vivre grew over the course of the 2 dozen years that I was the CEO from one little funky motel in the Tenderloin, and I'll come back in a second to talk about how I created that hotel, and how we created all of our boutique hotels because it's very experience design driven. In fact, Joe Pine and Jim Gilmore in the experience economy wrote about how we created hotels. And it grew to 20 or 52 hotels over 24 years, all of them in the state of California. And we became the second largest boutique hotelier in the US. In my late 40s, I struggled, went through a very difficult time on many levels. I had an NDE. I died, went to the other side. That's an experience. The experience designer who has created NDEs, near-death experiences, really good. I came back to this side at age 47 and said, like, I got to change my life. And I did. And I sold the company. It's a Hyatt brand now. Between 50 and 52, I created a midlife atrium for myself thinking that I'm going to live longer than I maybe think. And it's not like having two additional bedrooms in the backyard of my life, like living and just being old longer. I'm going to be in midlife longer. And so I decided to spend 2 years focusing on curiosity and studied festivals around the world. We can talk about that. We can talk about that. Focused on emotions and wrote a book called Emotional Equations that became a New York Times bestseller. And then also focused on hot springs. I was curious about hot springs. And so at age 52, I was asked by the founders of Airbnb 12 years ago to come into their little tech startup with an experience and hospitality perspective, because nobody in the company had a hospitality or travel background. And long story short is I became the mentor to the three founders. They called me the modern elder, which I didn't like at first because at 52, I felt like I'm not an elder. Like, what are you talking about? And they said, well, the average age here is 26, so you are absolutely an elder. But the thing is, they said a modern elder is someone who's as curious as they are wise. And it's your alchemy of curiosity and wisdom that we really admire. So I spent 7.5 years helping take that little tech company and turn it into the most valuable hospitality company in the world. While I was there, I started getting really interested in midlife and what it means to be a modern elder.
Oh, great.
Someone's got to mute. Sorry.
Oh, Jesus.
Josh, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
I got mute someone. Okay, there you go.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And so I wrote a book called Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder, about my experience at Airbnb. And while I was writing that book down in Baja, where I had a home on the beach, I went for a run on the beach one day and had a Baja aha. I had an epiphany. And the epiphany was, why is it that we don't have midlife wisdom schools or places for people to have rituals and rites of passage to understand what midlife's all about? And so that's really the third stage of my career: boutique hotels, Airbnb. And then for the last 7 years, I've been the founder and CEO of MEA, the Modern Elder Academy. And we have campuses in Baja, where my home was. We built a campus around my home. And then here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, on a 2,600-acre regenerative horse ranch. So that's my story. And we can dive into the experience design piece of this with Josh.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there's so many threads. There's so many threads. I mean, I think one of the things that's really interesting, I'm actually going to start off a little bit on the modern elder side, because I think there's actually this community, there's a lot of people who are probably like more like sort of senior experience designers and are used to seeing things getting disrupted all the time. And like right now, there's a huge amount of disruption in the experience economy, huge amount of disruption in tech. and like the ability to like kind of author your life at this chapter, I feel like is so important. And you'd mentioned curiosity, so I'd be curious to know, how do you nurture that? How do you make that happen?
So let's, yeah, curiosity is a quality that, and a way of being that is not very well tended in modern society. And what do I mean by that? I mean, we sort of live in a world in which it's about the know-it-all, not the learn-it-all. Satya Nadella, when he joined Microsoft or became Microsoft CEO, said, "Listen, we want to be. we're tired of being a know-it-all culture. Let's be a learn-it-all culture. Let's move from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset." And the challenge with curiosity is often people worry about looking dumb, but the bigger one is there's not enough time for it. So curiosity is an inefficient state of being. And so if efficiency is what you need, you have, for example, 30-minute executive leadership team meetings once a week, you're not going to have time to be curious. And that's fine. Like, you got to know, like, there's time to be transactional and get shit done. And then there's times to be curious. The problem is we don't give a lot of space for curiosity. And in my early 50s with that midlife atrium, where I said, there are 3 topics I'm really curious about. I want to go deep on all of them. I was lucky enough to have the blessing of having sold my company, to have the space to reimagine and repurpose and myself, but also learn more about these 3 topics. So what I would say in companies is, if you really want to create a curious culture, 3 things you might want to do. Number one is create enough space to have curious conversations on a regular basis, whether that's an offsite retreat or whether, once a month, your 30-minute meeting turns into a 2-hour meeting, and it's meant to be more of a brainstorm. And, there's that. Number 2 is, if you're going to do those kinds of meetings, have somebody who is meant to be the provocateur, the curious, royalty in residence, meaning the person whose job it is to just open up doors. And maybe that person, in advance of the meeting, sends out 6 or 10 questions that are sort of out of the left field kind of questions that help people to feel like, oh, wow, we're going to talk about that, or, oh, we're going to think about that. There's some value to actually make the soil, be good soil by helping that soil to have some time to ferment a little bit before you actually have the curious session. And then thirdly, just like celebrate your mistakes. That's sort of an old thing that's been talked about for a long time, but I have a different way of looking at it, which is since age 28, I have had a wisdom journal that I write in every weekend. So I spend 20 to 30 minutes and I say, what did I learn this week? And I get curious about my top 4 or 5 lessons of the week and how it might serve me in the future. So once a quarter on all the teams, Joie de Vivre, Airbnb, and here now at MEA, I do a practice, a wisdom practice with our leadership team, which is to actually sit down and have a longer meeting once a quarter to say, have each of the leadership team members say, here was my biggest lesson of the quarter, and here is how it's going to serve me in the future. And then other people on the leadership team can ask curious questions. And we train everybody in appreciative inquiry, which you're welcome to, Google that.
Yeah.
Okay, don't Google it. Bing it. I mean, I love Google, but we got to make sure that they're not a rapacious predator of what do you call it, a monopoly.
Yeah.
But go check out
ChatGPT. Ask Claude.
Yeah, exactly. And explore like what that it means, because actually to create a meeting where once a quarter your team is talking about what they learned, what it felt like, how it's going to serve them in the future. It allows us to say that wisdom is not taught, it's shared. And it's even better shared when there's curiosity in the room, talking about how it could have been done differently. But you have to have space for that.
No, it's really interesting. Yeah. And I wonder, do you ever think about like sort of scarcity versus abundance mindsets?
Yeah, I mean, I I'm sometimes cautious about it, because sometimes people who have an abundance mindset do not have their feet planted on the ground.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I just
Fair.
want to be honest. I mean, like, I think people would say, Chip, you have an abundance mindset. And I would say, yeah, I hope I do. And guess what? I better have my feet planted on the ground, because it gets a little bit into uh, the secret of what's the secret and all that kind of stuff, where
Yeah,
it's all about manifesting with your mind what you want to see in the world. I do believe in that. I believe in that in tandem with doing hard and good work.
yeah,
And so scarcity, the nice thing about abundance versus scarcity is scarcity will take you in one of two directions. It'll take you in the direction of like fear, and I've got to go kick ass to like make up for the fact that I'm again behind the eight ball with the scarcity mentality. Or what more often happens is people actually give up and they actually get depressed. And so that's why abundance can be quite good. The abundance mindset can be quite good in terms of like, okay, yeah, this is possible. It's, so now how are we going to do it? Where I have a challenge with some abundance mindset people is that they think if you just change your mindset alone, that's enough.
yeah. I mean, I have a very particular kind of lens through it because I came from, big museums. I was in house at the Smithsonian. And like museums in general are like not places of like financial abundance.
No.
They have like amazing like abundance and stories and intelligence and all those sort of things. But they're places where they don't have a lot of money and they're always scrapping. And I think a lot of fear seeps in, and then like the wanting to like do, wanting to be safe like comes in, and like and the fear of doing something new is very present. So like that's sort of the lens that I look at it through, and I'd be curious, from your perspective, if you see that.
I mean, that's, you're speaking about entrepreneurs too, being scrappy and resourceful and creative about how you are going to solve a problem. It can be great. I mean, it's nice. Necessity is the mother of invention, and curiosity is the taproot. It's really at we talk a lot especially in Silicon Valley, where I spent 40 years, about creativity and innovation, but curiosity is really the secret fuel behind those.
Mm.
Um, and so that's why a big fan at MEA. We do a lot to help people to look at how they can be more curious. We have a whole section of our library. All three of our different retreat centers in Baja and Santa Fe have amazing libraries, and we have a whole section on curiosity, which there's more books on curiosity out there than you might think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love it. So actually, I want to let's talk a little bit about experience design and actually and hospitality. So you started with one hotel in the Tenderloin. Why?
Yeah.
What made you think that was like you needed to do it different or better? There was an
And I'll tell
opportunity.
you how we did it that was different, that really influenced the industry to some degree. Long story short is I was a 25-year-old who had lots of people sleeping on my couch. And
Yeah.
my college friends, my business school friends who were coming to town, they didn't stay in hotels. They stayed in my couch. So I did no market survey other than to talk to the people who were like slumming it on my couch. And what I heard them say over and over again is like, in San Francisco, hotels are expensive and boring.
Mhm.
And this is way, way, way before Airbnb. And it's like, okay, huh. There's this new thing, boutique hotels. They're just getting off the ground with Ian Schrager and Bill Kimpton. And I said, well, you know what? Why couldn't I find out how to buy a hotel with some investors and create a boutique hotel? And so I didn't have a lot of money. And I found this pay by the hour motel in the Tenderloin on an acre of land. It was called the Caravan Lodge. It was famous because it was always full at lunchtime.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, I went there. And it's true. But it was in bankruptcy as well.
Mm.
And so long story short is I bought it out of bankruptcy for $800,000. Like you can't buy a condo in San Francisco for $800,000. This was in 1986. And crowned it as the Phoenix, the mythological bird that's rising from its own ashes, which is the unofficial bird of San Francisco because of the earthquake and fire in 1906. Long story short is when we were trying to concept what that hotel was going to be, I put on my experience design hat and tried to describe what I wanted it to be, and nobody got it. And so for the next meeting, when we were concepting this with our designers and architects and our general manager, I said the following: come to the next meeting with the one magazine that you think defines the essence of this hotel, the soul of this hotel. Because I started thinking that, boutique hotels are a lot like magazines. Magazines are
Mm.
niche oriented and lifestyle oriented, and so are boutique hotels. So at the next meeting, 5 of the 7 people showed up with Rolling Stone magazine because they knew I really wanted to create a rock and roll hotel. But I was describing it in a way that was, they weren't getting it the way I first set up the design discussion. So we sat down and we looked at these Rolling Stone magazines and said, like, what are the 5 adjectives that define Rolling Stone magazine? And we came up with funky, irreverent, adventurous, cool, and young at heart. And again, this was, almost 40 years ago. And so in all of our design of the hotel, the interior design, the experience design, the kind of staff we hired and how we trained them, the kind of restaurant we created, the kind of way we marketed the hotel, we came back to those 5 adjectives: funky, irreverent, adventurous, cool, and young at heart. And that's what we created in our first hotel. What was very interesting after we'd opened is I could start to see that the psychographic, not the demographic, the psychographic of the people who fell in love with this first hotel was people who were funky, irreverent, adventurous, cool, and young at heart. And they saw the hotel as an identity refreshment,
Mm.
an extension of who they are aspirationally. And so it's like, you are where you sleep. You are where you sleep. So long story short is, for the next 24 years, as we created 52 hotels, our experience design process was to imagine a magazine, or often a fusion of 2 magazines, a hybrid, and create hotels based upon that. So the Hotel Vitale in San Francisco, across the street from the Ferry Building, was real simple meets dwell, modern, urbane, fresh, natural, and nurturing. That was the experience design, but that was also the kind of psychographic we wanted to attract. And it turned out it became sort of a model for the boutique hotel industry. And yeah, and boy, do Jim Gilmore and Joe Pine from the Experience Economy really, really like it. So they actually ultimately did one of their Think About annual conferences at one of our Silicon Valley hotels. So yeah, so I think what the hotel industry desperately needed in the mid 1980s was soul. The challenge for a lot of companies is scale versus soul.
Mm.
And for most companies, especially if they're public companies, they learn how to make the scale thing work, and
Yeah.
they lose the soul in the process. And so for me, this experience design little conceit of using the magazines and 5 words and the identity refreshment language and concept ultimately allowed us to create a collection of soulful properties. And ultimately, when the dot-com bust happened, we made a major shift. We actually, on our website, had a character. Her name was Yvette, the hotel matchmaker. And you would take I think it was 5 questions in a test that would help us to understand your psychographic. And then we would actually deliver to you a list of the hotels in our collection that most suited your psychographic. But
Oh,
also
boy.
we did 2 other things. We since most of our hotels were in the Bay Area, we would actually we had a list of 500 things to do. We came up with I think it was 10 things to do that were most suited for you based upon your psychographic. And then finally, we actually introduced you to 2 locals who are most comparable to your psychographic. We ultimately created something called Golden Gate Greeter, which allowed you to meet them. But in the early days, all we did was have a profile of that person and their perfect day in San Francisco or Silicon Valley or Marin or wherever. And so in essence, you could learn, hey, this person's a lot like me, and here's how they would spend their perfect day. So yeah.
Oh, I love it. I love it. There's so many places I want to go from there. Where do I want to go? I mean, one, I'm gonna shout out the fact that, like, you guys didn't look at other hotels. Because, like, when you talk, I just know this from working with a lot of experiences. you talk to someone who's opening a new experience and they're like, oh, it's got to be like Team Lab or Meow Wolf or this or that. And, maybe it was just because you were so early in the boutique hotel thing that there weren't a lot of other places to rip off. But I love the fact that the point of departure was a magazine and not just like a place that did it similarly.
Yes. I figured, okay, I want to look like a guru now.
Oh, I like it. Yeah, exactly. Beautiful.
Actually, I'm now in a room that's air conditioned and I was in a space back at my
Oh, I'm
office.
sorry. Okay.
No, it's cool. I just like, okay, but now I
Yeah.
do look like some weirdo, but yes, I am a weirdo. Let's keep going.
Oh, no. I was just gonna commend you for not using other hotels as your point of departure
Yeah,
and
like
use.
why would I want to use Holiday Inn as my, I mean, there weren't a lot of examples of boutique hotels except for in Europe. I mean, boutique hotels is sort of a thing of the rest of the world. Europe already had boutique hotels for a long time. But the big difference between a boutique hotel in Europe in 1982 and when Ian Schrager was getting started with Morgan's, which was his first hotel, was a boutique hotel in Europe was sort of an independent hotel and still sort of conservative and stodgy. There really wasn't often a lifestyle component toward it. And the restaurant or bar would be nice, but it wouldn't have sort of a flavor, like I don't want to say hip flavor to it because not all boutique hotels are hip, but something that actually gave you a deep sense of the the local, being a local. And ultimately this idea of living like a local is when I joined Airbnb, I was like, okay, guys, I've been doing boutique hotels for, a long time. You are just the extreme version of a boutique hotel, and so what we really want people to do is not just say like more space, less money, which is what the home sharing movement was about, and I said, like, we really need to help people to feel like they can live like a local. And that's where we ultimately did an exercise that we did at Joie de Vivre, which was a question that we do here at MEA as well for all of our guests who come here. What business are you in? And we asked that question 5 times repeating, what business are you in? And by the time we got to the 5th answer on that with Joie de Vivre, we realized we were in the identity refreshment business. We weren't in the boutique hotel business. When we were at Airbnb, the first month after I joined, we did an offsite retreat with the 3 founders, and then I think there were 6 or 7 of the rest of us, the senior leaders, and I took people through this exercise, and we realized Airbnb is not in the home sharing business. We're in the belong anywhere business. And once we realized that Airbnb was in the belong anywhere business, it changed everything in terms of our experience design, how we trained our hosts, how we marketed ourselves. Living like a local became, sort of our language. And yeah, I mean, it made a huge difference. So that little tool of what business are you in comes from Peter Drucker. He said it's the most important question any organizational leader can ever ask. But the idea of doing the repeating question 5 times, one-on-one with someone else, and doing it with a group of people all in different rooms, and then coming back together and saying, where did you land on your fifth answer? And you couldn't answer the same way twice. And it's a huge tool, or a huge tool. It's a very insightful tool that helps you to almost do an archaeological excavation of the soul of the business and what makes it.
Yeah. No, and I think it's interesting because a lot of times those things change over time. It's like if you're a museum that was like founded, in the 1800s, you were a very different business and you were founded with a very different set of, principles and affordances and opportunities than you have, hundreds of years later, when you're, often the same building.
Yep.
Well, I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to kind of then I'll throw it to the crowd to see if anybody else has some things they want to ask. I'm sure they have plenty of things they want to ask. I actually want to ask a little bit about the 5-star experience. Because that's like something that I learned about from Brian Chesky.
7 stars.
7 stars. 7 stars. 5 is not enough. The 7-star experience, and it seems like a very natural extension of what you're talking about, being very visitor focused and optimizing for that experience. Could you describe that a little bit? And is that something that you kind of like or no?
I have mixed feelings about it. So Brian was my mentor. I mean, so my mentee. He was also my mentor. I called myself a mentor and an intern at the same time because I was learning as much from Brian as he was from me. But bottom line was Brian loved hyperbole and loves hyperbole. And so the idea of like, well, if Ritz-Carlton or Four Seasons is a 5-star, how can we be a 7-star? What I liked about it was aspiration. What I didn't like about it is how do you deliver on 7-star? What is it that makes it different than a hotel? And then how do you consistently deliver on that? And that was really part of my job at Airbnb was to take this fledgling little startup that was growing quickly globally that pretty much was focused on millennials in terms of the guest. Millennials on a budget who are going to the 20 biggest metro markets in the world. That was it when I joined. And how do you take that and then having a product that was incredibly inconsistent and actually make it more consistent? And what I said is it's never going to be consistent. Holiday Inn's consistent, consistently boring, but consistent. What we need to do is be dependable. And dependable means disappointment equals expectations minus reality. So if you're talking about 7-star experiences, Brian, you're setting up disappointment because you're building an expectation. So we better get really clear about what this means. And then we better get really clear with our hosts about what it means. And so frankly, I scrapped that language because I felt like we bought a company called Luxury Retreats. And in that segment of the business where people were paying $1,200 a night, we did need to deliver it on there. But to actually sort of aspirationally say that's what we should be doing across the whole platform, including where someone's paying $20 a night to be in a shared room with someone else, that just doesn't make sense. The language of 7-star. What we need to make sure it makes sense is, are people feeling like they're dependably getting what they expected? And how are we educating our hosts so that they can actually provide an experience that's better than in a hotel? Now that's where I'm proud, because when I joined, if you're familiar with NPS, Net Promoter Score, it gives people the ability to rate you from what ultimately is -100 to 100. The best companies in the world are, doing 70s, 80s, and they average in most industries is maybe at 20s or 30s. Some industries, the average is negative. In the hotel industry, the average was 48. NPS at Airbnb when I joined was 24. When I left, it was 72. And the reason it was 72, and even though, I mean, let's be honest, you'll have your worst experience and your best experience of your life in an Airbnb. And I used to say that about boutique hotels. The key was to figure out how you match people with the right experience. But what we really did was we doubled down on how do we help our hosts who are not our employees think like entrepreneurs and act like social alchemists and hosts who know how to be a mixologist of people. And we did it well. I'm really proud. We did it well. It doesn't mean all of our hosts were great. It just means we really, really put, we ultimately created something called the Airbnb Open, which we spent a fortune on. But every year for 3 years in a row, the first year in San Francisco with 1,500 people from 40 countries, the second year in Paris with 6,500 people from 110 countries, and then the third year in LA with 20,000 people from 115 countries around the world, came to these places, and it was a festival of hospitality where we helped hosts learn how to be better hosts. And it was an amazing experience for our employees to get close to our most, active hosts in the world. So, I can go into much more detail. We won a lot of awards for that, especially the third one we did in LA in 2016 was just off the charts. We had Lady Gaga and Maroon 5 as musicians. We had just the best people, Danny Meyer and, all kinds of famous people come in. And then we also had these workshops where we would help people with hosts sharing best practices. So long story short is, really important to look at the experience design and who's delivering it. Because at the end of the day, 7-star service without a plan for how our hosts deliver dependable service is a bunch of bullshit.
I
It's
love
just
it.
a bunch of words.
Okay, so I'll open it up. If people have questions, put it in the chat. But in the meantime, I want to put a question out there that I had. So Joie de Vivre Hotels, you started with one hotel. And then you ended up with 52 hotels, and then you ended up with a midlife crisis. Like, at what point did it stop being fun? Like, and you talked a little bit about scale versus soul, and I wonder if that also factored into that at all.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Um, so I started Joie de Vivre at 25 or 26 because of the creativity and the freedom. 24 years later, I didn't have a lot of that. I had 3,500 employees, was going through my second once in a lifetime downturn in the same decade, the dot-com bust, 9/11, SARS, and then a few years later, the Great Recession. I loved the concept and creation of the hotels. I loved the culture creating of the employees. I didn't love the way we'd structured the business financially, and yeah, just I frankly didn't want to be CEO anymore. I mean, I had the qualifications to do it as a Stanford MBA, but I just didn't like it. And the rest of my life was falling apart too. You know, what a lot of people don't know with the U curve of happiness is that 45 to 50, as you know, at age 47, is the roughest time of life on average globally. There's a lot of reasons for that. And I went through that. 45 to 50 just sucked for me. And the NDE I had was what gave me the hotelier's wake up call to say, you know what? I don't have to do this anymore. And yeah, it was hard. The next 2 years trying to find the right buyer at the bottom of the market was awful. But you know, I got through it. And you know, our painful life lessons are often the raw material for our future wisdom. And so sometimes when we're going through the hardest times, we are accelerating our wisdom and and the key is, as a society, we're not very good at this. We're good at accumulating knowledge. We're not good at distilling wisdom. And so that's why ultimately I created MEA. How do you help people? At this point, 5,500 people from 50 countries who've come to either of our two campuses to learn how to cultivate and harvest their wisdom. But I had to do that for myself in my late 40s. And so, yeah.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. And I lost five male friends aged 42 to 52 to suicide between 2008 and 2010. And so for me, part of the reason I created MEA is I was like, you know what? We need schools and tools to help people to get to the other side of their rough patch. The midlife crisis is really a chrysalis. It's just this, you know, this dark, gooey, solitary time in between caterpillar and butterfly. And we need to help people to understand the roadmap of how to navigate the transitions and cultivate purpose and own their wisdom.
All right, Chip, I'm gonna do a shout out for you. Your latest book, Learning to Love Midlife. I actually just listened to it on Audible where you read it. It was excellent. It was wonderful. So buy it, listen to it. It's great. All right, so now I'm gonna open it up to the community here. I'm gonna start with Matt. We'll go into Elijah, then Ming. All right, Matt Pritchard. You want to ask it? You want to ask your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I thought your observation that people were staying at your properties as a means of identity refreshment, this is really interesting to me. And I was wondering if you've seen that need for identity refreshment, like through engagement with a brand, pop up into other areas.
Oh my
Like,
God.
can you
Yeah.
talk to me a little bit about that?
I mean, if I'm understanding your question correctly, and if I'm not, Matt, interrupt me. But Harley Davidson's been doing this for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you
I
just
mean,
clarified, you stated in a way that it just unlocked it for me. Like, oh my gosh, that's something I think we all
yeah.
do.
Think
Yeah.
of it as, you know, how does the brand refresh your identity or your aspirational identity? Harley Davidson's been doing that forever. You want to feel you're a 50-year-old accountant, you know, and a recent empty nester, and you got a dad body. You're like, okay, I can be a rebel. I can go out and be my independent mofo on my Harley Davidson. So, I mean, let's be quite honest. Like, companies have been doing this for a long time. The question is it a bunch of, you know, crap? Is it just a sort of brand stuff that isn't followed through in all of the touch points of the organization? That's why I love Jim and Joe and the experience economy and the work they've done, because it's really, there has to be experience design throughout. And you don't have to be perfect at this, but, you know, to try to present yourself as the brand that will make you feel like, I don't know, like you're the most beautiful person in the world, but having clothes that don't fit right or are not priced properly. I mean, just there's lots of ways that you can get the cues wrong. But yes, I think identity refreshment is a great way to look at it. And that language came from Joie de Vivre.
That's really interesting. And do you, I mean, can I pin something on the backside of that? Do you think that I sometimes think some brands are very extractive and some are more contributive, and, in terms of like how they orient towards their customers? I mean, is that sort of an observation that you sort of see, or not really?
I think in the long run, there's certain industries where having a transactional relationship, with a telecommunications company, yeah, you probably, yes, reach out and touch someone that that was, a brand message for AT&T a long time ago. And, maybe it made you feel good and therefore you bought something from AT&T. But at the end of the day, there's some industries that are just transactional. There's some that don't have to be. I think the airline industry has gotten it so fucking wrong, excuse my language, but they've made it transactional because the OTAs have made it such that you can just compare pricing so easily, and therefore they all go to the lowest common denominator. I mean, we're talking about American Airlines, airlines in the US here. But yeah, I think that in some cases that looking at the relationship as more generous, how is generosity built into the relationship? What are the things we can do that will surprise and delight? It's really important. My favorite book of the books, I've written 7 books, and my favorite book, and for experienced designers, it should be a Bible, is Peak: How Great Companies Get Their Mojo from Maslow. And the way I think of the customer experience based upon Maslow's hierarchy of needs is at the base of the pyramid, 3-level pyramid, is meet their expectations, and that creates satisfaction, but rarely does that create loyalty. The second level of the pyramid is meet their desires, and that meet desires creates some commitment from the customer, more likely to be loyal. But at the top of the pyramid in the peak model in my book is meet the customer's unrecognized needs. Do something for them that they weren't expecting. Find a need that they didn't even know they had. Deliver on something that they're not even paying for. And when you do that, you create loyalty. And the companies that can do that well, like Patagonia, back in the day, Southwest Airlines, not anymore. You create this halo effect that makes you have a differentiated experience that elevates what you are offering versus your competition. And that's why identity refreshment or belong anywhere is a great mantra, whatever the 2-word mantra is for your company, that can help you to sort of say like, okay, that's what we're betting on. How do we do that better than anybody else?
Right. So I'm tempted to talk about my 7-year-old daughter and Taylor Swift. Because if you want to talk about like the very tip or like beyond the top of that pyramid, I think it's a really, really interesting case study, and maybe we can go. I'll let some other people ask questions.
Okay.
Elijah, you want to answer your question?
Sure. Hey, by the way, Chip, we briefly met in Tepoztlan a couple years ago at Tim Cheng's Day. One of my biggest regrets was not cornering you and talking to you more. I thought we'd have more time, but I mean, I was impressed with you then and very impressed with you now. So
thank you.
So stoked to be reconnected, and thanks, Josh. Yeah, my question is, simply put in the text here is, and Josh, you touched on it earlier, but AI, right? So, friend or foe of it, and then also specifically, how do you think about, if at all, like using AI to create personalized experiences, all while balancing, human soul and emotion, because AI is for now kind of soulless, right? It's just a hodgepodge of general information. So that's kind of my question and thought.
Yeah, the way I like to think of AI, and we have some people in our MEA, Modern Elder Academy organization, who know it a lot better than I do. That's for sure. I think of AI as historic, is backward looking, because it's just consolidating information and knowledge. And I think of humans, when they get it right with wisdom, is intuition, ingenuity, and empathy, ethics, and it's actually future oriented. So I think the challenge with AI often is you're unlikely to find innovation through AI unless you've got a form of AI and a way of doing AI that's vastly different than what I know of. It doesn't mean you can't go out and find what's out there in the world that's innovative. It's just the fusion of all of those into something that has never been thought of before. The ingenuity around that is, we're early in that process. Will we get there with AI? I think we will. Soul. So one of the reasons I think that MEA is a big deal, and we were just profiled last week in Time Magazine as one of the 100 greatest places to visit in 2024, our Santa Fe campus that had just opened in May, was because, quite frankly, we're in an era in which wisdom and how do you create midlife wisdom schools? How do you create places for people to be the anti-AI? How do you actually take those human qualities and give people the tools to understand how to be more curious, how to be more ingenious, how to be more empathetic, and how to be more soulful. And so we've sort of cracked the code on that. I would welcome anybody. My email address is just chip@chipconley.com. If any of you want to email me and ask about one of our programs, we have financial aid, and so if anybody can't afford it, but I really believe strongly that creating places where people can retreat to understand how to cultivate and harvest their wisdom is what we have to do for the future. And I have an HBR, Harvard Business Review article that came out this week called Why Wisdom Work is the New Knowledge Work. Knowledge work is a dime a dozen now. It's a commodity. Wisdom work is the future, but we have not created organizations that know how to do this, how to actually create wisdom, how to actually share it with others, how to make sure wisdom transfer in organizations done well. And so we're really the first place I know of that's doing this.
I love it. Ming had a question.
Now I'm rethinking my question after what you just said. But you spoke to a bunch of us in Boston arts organizations back in 2010 or so, and it had a big impact on me, particularly the idea of identity refreshment. So I've been really using that in my work in museums since then. And now I'm working at a public aquarium where we're focusing on communicating climate change and climate change solutions. So I was just curious if you have experienced a space, and now I'm thinking the answer may be what you just talked about, but a place where there is that, collective wisdom building around what we can do, a public space that is just openly available to anybody to walk in at any given time. Do you have any examples?
I don't. What I would say if I were in your business, and my father at age 86, turning 87 next month, is literally in a workshop this week. The average age of people coming to MEA is 54. It's about 64% women. And it's all people from all industries. But my dad at age 86 is in a purpose workshop this week, and he is a total aquarium nut. And so there's a place called the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California, where I grew up. And there's a whole wing of the aquarium named after my dad and my mom. So I like aquariums. What I would say for aquariums and for a lot of different like museums and a lot of the kinds of organizations that you guys are involved in is how do you package yourself as the place where people have their synapses connecting in a whole new way? I mean, I remember someone at Apple used to say, we take our creative types at Apple to the zoo once a year, just because it's a whole different way of the brain looking at things. And so similarly, how do you think of coming to a museum or an aquarium as not just sort of thing you do with your kids, or maybe you do with some friends, but actually you do it with your leadership team, and you actually have enough meeting space there. So people come and you have prompting questions so you're Brian Eno had a term called scenius, where there's genius in the scene. Genius in the scene. Scenius, and so how do you become a place of genius where there's genius in the scene and you create the habitat for epiphanies to happen? You're an epiphany creator, and that's where I would go if I were you. And I'm gonna put, oh yeah, thank you. Like wait, is Leica here? Where's Leica?
Yeah, like us here.
Oh, there she is. There they are. They are.
Yeah.
She, they, them, all forever. We have been in experience design conversations with Corvus, our friend, one of the co-founders of Meow Wolf, who's got a new really cool thing.
Oh, is it the hot spring or something? Is it a hot spring or a
submersive?
submersive? That's it.
Yay! Yeah.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, like we'll have you back on here to talk about submersive. We'll make it happen.
Beautiful.
So actually, I think we have time for maybe one more question. Ming Shi, you had a question.
Near-death experience, those are questions.
Let's talk about near-death experiences. I have a guy for that, but I'm not bringing him on this on the webinar. You have to DM me.
Yeah. So long story short is the reason I had a near-death experience was because I had an allergic reaction to an antibiotic. And so I was giving a speech on stage in St. Louis, and I was signing books, and I literally went unconscious, and they put me on the ground. And fortunately, about 5 minutes later, the paramedics showed up. I don't know whether when I was on the ground, whether I died or not. What I know is that when they put me on the gurney to get me to the hospital, they had heart monitors, and for the next 90 minutes, I went flatline 9 times. And my experience that I had was sort of consistent. And it was the reason I know it was consistent was because there were 2 different people who held my hand through that process. And when I would go out, I would say, God, this is what I just saw. And they would say, one of them was a nurse, one of them was one of the speech organizers who like said, like, oh my God, my speaker after a speech died on stage. And so she held my hand in the ambulance. And they both said the same thing. Chip, you keep saying the same thing over and over again. And that my experience was, I was this flying little bird in the second story of a mountain chalet that felt like in Switzerland or something. There was light coming in, a huge skylight in the roof, such that there were kaleidoscope of colors on the wall that were just visually stunning. There was a frangipani, a tropically scented oil, viscous oil, going across a dark wood floor. And I had a long arm. I was like flying with little birds, and we were singing together. And I put my hand down on the floor, like the bird hand on the floor, to just touch. And the frangipani scented oil that was going along the floor was tasted like beautifully. And everything was slow motion, and everything was awe. I sensed awe in that moment. And I came out of, and I was actually I was a bird wearing slippers, and the slippers had, one slipper said slow, and the other slipper said down. And those slippers came from the Hotel Vitale, one of my hotels. Because that's exactly when you get, and you checked into your room, we had a slow and a down, because that hotel, again, was meant to be sort of a spa hotel in the financial district. And so what I took from it was, I better slow down. And that's part of the rationale for why I sold the company as well. Because that was, when I was 47. So I could tell you a lot more, but that's all I'll say for now.
Chip, I asked you at the beginning if there were things that we should talk about, and I didn't get to many of them. So this could go on for quite a while. But I think we have 5 minutes left. So let's just touch on all for a second. Let's keep hooking on. Let's talk about all. And if you want to bring in social alchemy, we can talk about that as well.
So Dacker Keltner is on our guest faculty at MEA. He teaches twice a year. And he's a UC Berkeley professor, started the Greater Good Science Center. And he wrote a book last year called Awe, A-W-E. And he studied around the world what were the 8 most common pathways for people to feel awe. And what he found was surprising. Number 1 on the list was not nature. Nature was number 3. Number 2 on the list was collective effervescence. When our sense of ego separation evaporates and our sense of communal joy expands. And I was a founding board member of Burning Man. I know what collective effervescence is. I was on the board of the Glide Memorial Church, an inner city African-American church that was very broad in terms of its who loved there. I felt collective effervescence when I was there on Sundays and heard the gospel choir sing. So collective effervescence is when we feel part of something bigger than ourselves. It could be at a political speech. Number 1 on the list of awe shocked everybody, including Dacker. It's moral beauty. It's when you are witnessing kindness, compassion, courage, equanimity, the best humanity has to offer. And in so doing, in so seeing it, you feel better about yourself. You feel like you can do that as well. And so what I would just say for experienced designers out in the world is, don't go buy my book. You're welcome to if you want. I would say buy Peak. Buy Peak for sure. But buy Dacker's book about awe, because at the end of the day, awe is what we try to aspire to in our experience design. Now, in terms of social alchemy, as a social alchemist who is a mixologist of people, every single week in Baja and Santa Fe with 20 to 24 people in a workshop, in 3 different workshop centers. Our job and my job as the CEO and founder is to learn how to be a mixologist of people. And I do that through collective effervescence and moral beauty. And if you want to just come to MEA, come to a workshop that I'm leading, because we can then spend some time talking about it and you can see what we do. And our NPS, Net Promoter Score, is 92.
I love it. I love it. Well, that's like absolutely like the perfect thing to conclude on. I actually think that there's some real moral beauty in this. I think there's some really fantastic stuff in your work. I'm a huge fan of the million untapped postcards.
Just email me, you guys. Email me if questions. Aaron, the author of Peak, is me. There's a lot of books called Peak, but just find the book about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Peak.
Yeah, and I would say that, if you can't get a hold of Chip, get a hold of me. I will try to get a hold of Chip. If you have any questions or follow-ups or need to find the map to MEA, let me know. Happy to help, happy to support the community. Chip, thank you so much. This was like really, really brilliant. It was a wonderful conversation. You're not supposed to have favorites in these things, but this was up there. This was really great. I'm a huge fan. Thank you everybody for joining. Hope to see you guys again soon, and we'll catch you on another one. Thanks so much, Chip. Have a good one.
See ya. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.